Hi my friend, in this video we're going to be making underground tech house bass inspired by Mal P's song Beats for the Underground. And we're going to find out if we can do this in 20 to 30 minutes using the 80-20 rule of tech house bass. And what you're listening to right now is the actual track that we'll be working on, and what you're looking at right now is the Ableton project file that we'll be working on. In particular, we're going to focus on this bass group right here, and we'll be going over things in the order that I actually created them, so you can kind of follow along and kind of recreate this when you're creating your own bass for your songs. All in all, the bass did take me about maybe 20 minutes to create, because I was doing it against this reference track right here. And all in all, this entire track, mixed, mastered, arranged, and completely ready to go, took about 5 hours to create. So finishing songs faster is something that you'd like help with. I've made you a free bundle of templates, samples, and special bonuses that I use to completely finish one song every single week. Just visit the link that's in the description or on screen right now to grab the ultimate song finishing toolkit for free. And with that said, let's jump into this. Alright, so now let's take a look at the bass. So, what we're listening to right now is the drums with the bass just by themselves. And now let's have a listen to the bass just by itself for a moment. And so the main things that I want to show you here is I do have the Mal P Beats for the Underground track in here as a reference track. I've turned it off and I set it up so that when I press the S key, it's going to solo it by itself. So I can go like this. This is the reference. And then this is ours. So the idea here is, I mentioned in other videos, but the idea is to flick back and forth between the reference so that you can select the right pattern. So choose the right MIDI notes, make sure that that's correct by flicking back and forth. You can make sure that the sound design and the sound selection is right by mixing back and forth. And you can also mix back and forth to set the volume of your bass to be the correct way. And this is really going to be that 80-20 rule to make your track sounding super duper professional. It's going to be another trick that we're going to talk about in a minute, because this is a good way to replicate, but we do want to innovate as well. But to start things off, here's a look at the MIDI notes that I landed on here. It's kind of a pretty basic pattern, I would say. It's pretty cool. I don't really know any too music theory stuff, but have a look at the pattern here and see if you can find anything. But this is basically, again, just flick back and forth and slowly pick the right notes. I also looked on Beatport to find the key of the song and then set the scale to it over here so that it kind of limited the selection of notes to make things a little bit easier. Then when it comes to the bass sound design, there's a couple of little tricks that I do want to show you here. So inside of this bass group, I have two MIDI tracks here. And the first one is this sub sound. So let me just pause that so you can hear that by itself. You're definitely going to want to have probably headphones on this to hear this, but usually what I like to do as a little trick is I like to have my subs on a separate MIDI track, and there's two reasons for that. One is it's very similar to, say, if you're kind of using a piano or a guitar, a very basic sound, you can use that to kind of just focus on getting the notes down very, very correctly without getting too bogged down in sound design or having the sound design kind of color your ear as you're selecting the right notes. You can really drill down on making sure the notes are correct. Second is it will come in handy when you're mixing, so by having a sub-track, you can really focus on that track, taking care of the low end of the track, and then having a mid-bass track to kind of add in a sound and a character. So with that said, let's take a look at what we have here for the sub-bass. And so what we have is this little V-sub that I've created, and basically it's just a rack that I made. It's using Operator, and it's mostly just a basic sine wave sound with some options to add in some saturation and some EQ to kind of shape the sound a little bit more, but really it's mostly just a sine wave bass sound. And if you do want this like V-sub, and if you want access to all these project files, there will also be a link in the description to grab this project file, all my previous track project files, and I'm also finishing a new track every single week, so you'll get access to weekly project files as well. But with that said, just adding a little bit of kind of saturation to kind of fill out the sound and add a little bit of character, and so you can kind of hear this stuff a bit more in headphones and crappy laptop speakers and that kind of thing. And then we are doing a little bit of one-knob sidechain. So I have a sidechain shaper here that adds that pumping sound to an LFO, or instead of using like a compressor and mapping into a kick and all that kind of messy stuff. So you can just do it in one shot, super duper easy. Again, the main thing here is having that sub sound and flicking back and forth between this and the reference like this. Really trying to pay attention to the low end. Then the next thing that I'll usually do is then I'll add in the next track, which is this track here, and I'll even solo it for a moment so you can kind of hear what this sounds like on its own. Which sounds like, I would say, poo on its own, but together it has like a cool, ravey, underground kind of sound. What I have going on here is you'll notice that there's no MIDI track, so this is a little trick that I like to do. So instead of having the MIDI track on both of these channels, what I'll do is instead I'll have this one, and you can click this drop down here, instead of all ends, select it to the sub track, and this is going to make it so that the MIDI on this track will automatically route into this track here. So if you make any changes to the MIDI as you're building out your tracks, you won't have to Control C, Control V, or Command V, control all that copy and paste crap a million times to get everything corrected. It's just automatically going to route in, which adds a lot of flexibility in the songwriting process, I would say, and just makes things a lot cleaner and easier to use as well. Then in terms of the actual sound design, what I'll usually do is have this pitch device here, so that way if you run into the chance where, say, the sub note sounds really good at a certain octave, but then that octave doesn't sound as good on the mid-bass layer, you can easily adjust it. So you can see here that I had to pitch it up 12 semitones or an octave above the sub. Then what I have is this bass guitar sound, which I grabbed and sampled from the Trillion DSC, which I think is amazing, but also has a lot of load, CPU load, and takes a while to load up basically. So I basically sampled it and dropped it into a sampler here at different pitch intervals, so it sounds kind of nice and clean. Adding a little bit with the circuit SMP, a little bit of drive here to kind of add some saturation, fill the sound a little bit, add some extra character and that kind of grit. And then I did play with the decay and the sustain a little to tighten up the sound a bit against the sound of the sub. Other than that, main thing when you are working with individual sub versus a mid bass, you're going to want to have an EQ on the mid bass and kind of get rid of a bunch of the low end. So in this instance, I have removed 200 hertz. Everything above 200 hertz is remaining. Everything below 200 hertz is gone, and that kind of keeps space for the sub to really take care of the low end. So that way the mid bass is just taking care of the character and the sound and the grit and all that. Then what I have is this transient shaper, which is a free transient shaper. It just maps some of the common knobs here. So I'm using a bit of this, removing some of the sustain to kind of again tighten up the sound again. And then I'm running it into a one knob sidechain as well to kind of get that pumping effect and make room for the kick. Again, this stuff here is like a channel strip that I use in every single one of my tracks, the kind of custom build that I've created. If you want access to it again, this as well will be a link in the description to get all the project files, racks, and all that kind of stuff. So that kind of really is a look at the bass. Then we're just routing it into this group track here. The compressor and saturation is off. I have it there just in case I do want to kind of play with those things. Other than that, I'm running into a K clip and clipping about, is it 4 decibels? Barely anything here. Just leaving it on here just in case it does go above 0. Can kind of take care of that. What I do want to mention though is that's more or less a look at the recreation of the Mount P sound and bass, at least my interpretation of it. But then I have built out this full track here. So if I go back here, what I did was kind of changed up the sound, or not the sound, but rather the MIDI, to make it a little bit more unique. So it's kind of going for the same vibe, but it's a little bit different. And this is something I would recommend you do as well. If you're working against a reference track, always use it as a starting point. Really focus in on it to select the right sounds, the right patterns, and most importantly, to get the right volumes against the reference track so that you can have that shortcut to a really polished sound. But at certain points, you're going to want to make creative changes, change up the notes, make it your own. So that way it's not just a carbon copy of the original tune, and you can evolve it into your own track. And that's exactly what I did here. Hello again, my friend. Hopefully you found that video useful. If you'd like to follow along yourself with the 5-step song finishing checklist, there will be a link in the description below where you can get access to that completely for free, and it's going to help you finish your songs a lot faster and better than ever before. If you found this video useful, like and subscribe and all that good stuff, but really the best thing I can do for you is hook you up with that free checklist, so make sure you check that one. Other than that, I'll see you in the next video, my friend. Have a good one.